Hey folks, Scott Weingart here, and this is the EMCrit podcast. In fact, this is the 400th episode of the EMCrit podcast. Wow. And it's not just 400. We've done so many we's and other stuff. It's so many episodes, and I still love it. I still love talking to you. I still love thinking about this stuff. So I was, for the 400th episode, going to do a philosophy of EMCrit, the epistemology of EMCrit, which is the branch of philosophy dealing with how we know what we know. But it was only three-quarter baked. I really kept going back to it, and it's why this episode is slightly delayed, and I still don't think it's quite there. And so that will be coming at some point. But I figured then, since I couldn't do that episode for this 400th, I would do a Mind of the Resuscitationist episode. It's been there since the beginning of EMCrit. I love it. It is an outlet for all of these philosophical musings, but in a real clinically oriented way, a way that improves your performance in resuscitation. And Mind of the Resuscitation, it's been there since the beginning. Now, I know there are people who just want pure clinical content, and much clinical content is coming in the coming weeks, so don't give me crap. And I think since this is a members-only episode, that it strips out most of those evil Redditors anyway. But just in case, no, clinical stuff is coming next week. In fact, I have a pediatric front of neck access episode that is airing that is pretty fucking amazing. And I say that because Cliff Reed is the guest and he was doing the supply of the information. So I have a few topics in Mind of the Resuscitationist that I wanted to talk to you about today. And some of them are linked and some of them are standalones, and we'll see how it goes. The first concept that I want to talk about is a Chinese term from Taoism called Wu Wei. Now, I've also heard this pronounced Wu Wei. And I'm sure I'm butchering the Mandarin. I don't have the tonality that is necessary to really speak that language, but I think that's close enough. And what Wu Wei means is no doing or not doing or non-doing is the literal translation. But the figurative meaning of the phrase is effortless action, action without effort. And I've also seen it written as Wu Wei, which would mean doing without doing. And that, I think, really encompasses the meaning I want to get across. Doing without doing. What does that mean? It means acting from a deeper or instinctual basis rather than having to act from a really diligent, thought out, in the moment way. And it gets to what we're going to talk about in a little bit as well, the difference between System 2 and System 1 actions from the Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky perspective. System 1 being the instinctual, the heuristic, the intuitive, and System 2 being the carefully thought out, rationally planned. And Wu Wei would have you understand that action from that instinctual side is not only at least as good, but from this perspective, much better than this carefully thought out planning. And when you think about it, it's really bringing up the flow state, right? Acting from flow means that you're at just that right spot in the challenge curve that you could act without having to think, and therefore you're in a no-mind state and yet still do exactly the right thing. This effortless action feels amazing when you're in that flow state, and yet you're actually accomplishing hard things, that it just feels amazing. It feels effortless. It feels like you are performing with the lightest of touches. That's Wu Wei. And it's to be cultivated. It doesn't just happen. It can just happen. But better is to cultivate a consistency of Wu Wei, of this effortless action, of this doing without doing. So how would you go about cultivating that in resuscitation? The true Taoist stance maybe is not as applicable. The Taoist stance is you basically are just acting from a deeper spiritual instinct. And that might be wonderful for choices in life. I don't think it's really applicable to high-level resuscitation. I think the Confucian perspective on Wu Wei is a little bit more in keeping with what it would take to have this effortless action in resuscitation. And the Confucian description of this is carving and polishing. Carving and polishing. So you're consistently taking your performance, you're carving out what is good and retaining it, you're polishing, you're continuing to work. And what does this mean? This means that the effortless action takes an insane amount of effort to get to that place. Work, diligent practice, forethought, planning, and all of those things eventually get you to where I think you should aspire to be in resuscitation, where it feels effortless, where it feels like things are just happening without any real strong conscious thought. So we're going to aspire to Wu Wei. And so how do you get there? There's a few different paths that I want to discuss. And the first one I mentioned during an episode I did on burnout, and it's the dichotomy of tension and relaxation. This came from Josh Waitzkin from his Art of Learning book, amazing book. And this, I think, is one of the paths to Wu Wei, is a real conscious perception of the times you're in tension and the times you're in relaxation. And any high performer should be spending almost all of their time in relaxation, in this deep state of performance while not hyped up, not frenetic, in this calm, relaxed mode. And then every so often when you need to bring it, you switch over to tension and you use that tension to up your skill curve. And then when that situation's over, you pull back to relaxation. And on an ED shift, even on a resuscitation shift, you'd be spending most of your time in relaxation. And then something critical beyond Wu Wei comes in, and you move up to that tension curve, and then you fall back to relaxation. So escape patient comes in, right? Sympathetic crashing acute pulmonary edema. Episode 1 of EMCrit coined that term. Escape patient comes in, and their SATs are in the toilet, blood pressure's through the roof, 240 systolic, sweating. EMS might even be bagging that patient. And you're still in a state of relaxation. You know exactly what to do. You've thought about this countless times. You've treated these patients hundreds of times. And you just act, right? No tenseness at all. Even though others in the room may be tense, the paramedics may be tense, though if they're practicing these same acts of mind of the resuscitationist, then they might be in the same state of Wu Wei, of relaxation. And you just effortlessly put them on non-invasive, or you put them on a BVM with a P valve with a nasal cannula underneath, thereby enacting that same CPAP. You put them on ultra high dose nitroglycerin, or maybe you bolus them 1 milligram, and all of a sudden 5 minutes later the patient starts looking fantastic. They're not out of the woods yet, they're going to be fine. And you haven't had any of that frenetic energy. And you now slide just back into that state of relaxation. If you had any tension at all, but if you did have tension, and this is the other part of it, that tension was in the challenge portion of the stress challenge spectrum, right? For any tension, you could be challenged by it. Could it increase your capabilities on that Yerkes-Dodson curve? Or you could feel stress, meaning you're not viewing it as a challenge. You're not viewing it as something you're capable of, something that you're just going to now get an opportunity to exert your skills. Instead, it's a threat, right? Threat challenge is the spectrum, and we want to be on that challenge side when we're in tension. So now it's another layer, right? You have tension, relaxation, and then you have threat and challenge in that tension mode. And we want to spend our time in relaxation, and then when we're in tension, we want to be on the challenge side of it, because that's going to lead to optimal performance. What's another path to Wu Wei? I call this